right, welcome to week 6. We're going to tie several versions of the woolly bugger. We're going to add a bunch of stuff to it. So I did want to cover, on that note, I wanted to cover a couple things. I had a few comments on my YouTube channel. People asking, why is this video so long? And somebody said, well, you didn't even put your thread to the hook in 3 minutes. And so I just want to make sure I want to specify why I don't do that on these particular videos. These are supplemental videos to live classes that I do, and I've been doing these now for about 4 years, a little over 4 years. And so there's a lot of people that can't make the live class, and so I try to cover as much as possible and help beginners out as much as I possibly can by showing them all the options that they have available. And so that's actually why these videos are quite a bit longer. Not all my videos are that way, but if you scroll through my stuff and you see, week 1, week 3, 5, whatever, those are for class videos that I've done in the past. So that's why. So without further ado, let's get started. I've got a size 6 × 3 long streamer hook in the vise. I'm just going to use some white 8/0 uni thread, and I'm going to start that about 2 to 3 bodkin widths behind the eye. Normally I come up just a little bit further than that. The reason I'm starting a little bit further back is because we're going to add a collar to this fly. And I'll show you the reason why we're going to do it to this particular one. So we're going to tie this with dry fly hackle for the body. And some people really like dry fly hackle for the body on their woolly buggers. It does kind of this and doesn't collapse around the hook, kind of like this, where it just like encompasses the hook. But that also allows you to have a collar that can kind of sit on top, and as these little tiny, you can see how these little barbs are sitting on top, so as these little barbs are kind of doing this, these are actually just kind of moving ever so slightly, and it kind of shows some movement in the water. All right, so let's just go ahead and keep rolling here. I'm going to take my thread back to about the barb. You can see I'm just using big open spirals. You can see the gaps in between. And that's totally fine. Actually, I kind of prefer it for tying in the marabou. The marabou we're using is from Nature's Spirit. I can't speak highly enough of Nature's Spirit marabou. I'm doing this just to show you how even those tips are. And we don't need all of this feather. All this back end stuff can actually be used for twisted bugs, like a 2-cent caddis or something, where you can strip it off the side. You can twist it together and actually use this itself as the body material or a chenille. So all we need is something that's roughly twice the length of the hook gap or somewhere in there. So, something like this is more than enough. And so we can just separate this out. Don't have to get it perfect. And then what we can do is we can actually trim just right there on that gap. And now you can save this. I put it in a different package. But, matter of fact, actually, you can see how all those tips are still. You could actually just fold this all together and you've got yourself another woolly bugger tail right there. And so keep that aside. Now, a lot of people, especially when you're new to fly tying, struggle tying in marabou, and you don't have to at all. There's a real simple way to tie this stuff in. Either get like a damp sponge or a paper towel, or you can just lick your fingers and just draw all this together until it turns flat, like that. I typically do it twice. You can run it through your mouth. A lot of people don't think it's a good idea because you're sucking in dye. Look how straight those tips are. It's amazing. And so what we need to do here is gauge how long we want our tail. Okay. So there's actually, some people like it just the length of the shank. Some like it to be a little bit more, so it'll be kind of sitting out back there. There's actually a couple English style patterns that really require these like massive long marabou tails on something that's like a woolly bugger. It's very, very, very similar. So you're gonna have to just kind of gauge how far that you want it. Typically I just kind of like it about the length of the shank, so when I pinch this together in front of the eye, it lines up roughly with where my thread is. Now I'm going to take that dimension and place it right on top of where my thread is, and place a few wraps over. I'm going to turn to the side and check it. You can take your thumb and kind of roll this stuff around, lift it up, roll it around, twist it a little bit until it starts to splay open, kind of just like so. Now you can wrap this guy forward. Personally, I like to keep this on top if I can. This one's rolling on me. Just to help build the, so it doesn't change size too much when we're building this. Now, also a lot of people like to add lead wire or lead-free wire, and you can do that. You'll want to do that beforehand, and you'll want to start your lead about where I started my thread and work back as far as you want. Some people like it front-loaded. Some people like it the length of the body. This is all preference, and you'll have to decide what works best for you for whatever situation that you need. I mean, if you're fishing real skinny water, you probably don't want any lead. If you're fishing real deep water, you may want a whole bunch of extra lead. I mean, it's really up to you. So now that we're here, there's two different ways to tie in your hackles. So what I have here is a dry fly hackle. I'm going to kind of pop this open. You can see it doesn't extend very far past the overall dimension of the shank. It's going to grow in size just a little bit once the chenille's down. But the other style of feather is one of these big webby ones. Both of these are saddle hackle. This is just, actually both these come from dry fly saddle. This is just on the back side where the saddle starts to get longer. And this is more on the dry fly side. Both these came from the same cape. Both of these are from whiting. So you can see the difference in the variant there. And we're going to use this big webby one on the second fly. So when we're tying in a collar, like I was talking about or I showed you, and that's just the front hackle up front. You don't have to do this at all. It's just something that you can do on a woolly bugger that's kind of fun. And so I'm going to use these little dry fly barbs, because what they're going to do is they're going to kind of stand up. They'll lean to the back a little bit, but they're going to kind of flutter in the water until they become totally waterlogged. But they're going to flutter a little bit, and they're going to help keep that collar kind of bouncing around and giving it some movement like this. So you can kind of imagine your flies in the water. I mean, eventually it's all going to collapse just like, this, but I digress. I'm just trying to show you some different things and give you some different pointers when you're selecting your hackle. Also, you can tie your hackle in the back, which some people do for a quick tie. If you want like a guide fly, you can tie it in the back and just wrap it forward with no rib at all, and that's totally fine. The odds are that way of tying is going to trash the fly much faster than if you actually add a little bit of wire. And the reason being is because the wire is going to help protect all of the individual ribs going across, or all of the individual stem ribs, if you will. And so I'm going to pull out about 6 to 8 inches of just some silver wire. I'm going to tie this in on the bottom side and bring it back to the back till it just meets up right with the tail. I'll probably go another turn. We'll clip that wire and get it out of the way. And my chenille disappeared. There it is. Thought I had a piece pulled. Sorry, I do not. Let me get one real quick. And so next we're going to need, probably another 6 to 8 inches of chenille. What I'm using here is a sparkle chenille. And we want to prep this the same way, where you can just take your fingers and strip this off the edge. I actually find it easier. I've got dedicated wire scissors. That's why you get the little black mark on there, where I can almost close them and just pull. We kind of covered that last week on the carry special. But you can tie this in just like so. These things are going to start to twist all around the hook. It's not a big deal. You can lick your fingers, twist them together to try to help keep them more in line as you're tying it in. You can also line this up. What I like to do is make sure that my chenille is sitting back into the tail just ever so slightly, so right about here. So if I lift it up and down, you can kind of see where my wraps are going to be. But you could also, bring your thread forward and then wrap back into that, getting it close. And this is totally up to you. It's not going to make a whole big difference on the underbody of this fly anyway. It's just not. So there's that. Just different people do things a little bit differently, and I'm trying to cover as much as possible. Okay, so like I said, you can tie this in the back and then wrap this forward. You would tie, if you want to do it that way, you would tie this in where you would tie the wire in, or at the same time you would tie the wire in, and then tie your chenille in. That can affect a lot of people I've seen over the years. So what we're going to do is we're just going to strip some barbs off the side, get this right up front. Now wherever we tie this hackle in matters, because this is where the woolly bugger is going to start. And we're going to add a collar to this like I showed you. So the way I like to tie this in is with a figure 8. So you can see I'm coming up and over and cross wrapping from upper here to lower left, right? Upper right to lower left. And now I want to come from upper left down to lower right, and I'll do a couple of those, and that's like a double figure 8. Now I've got this stem to deal with. Pardon me. You can lay this out front like so. You could fold this to the back, which you'll see people do with dry flies to help build the taper to the dry fly. And either way is up to you. Personally, on a woolly bugger, this is not a dry fly. I'm just going to wrap this in coming forward a few turns and then trim it out. Dry fly, that could make a big difference. On a woolly bugger, it's not gonna matter at all. So now we have all this stuff hanging out. Okay. So I'm going to wrap this chenille clockwise, and just like we did with the carry special, each turn we come around after the first full turn, I'm going to start to just gently brush that to the back. You want to make sure you have nice, tight, you're actually putting some tension on this. The difference between putting tension on your chenille and not putting tension on your chenille often can make the difference in whether the body looks good or not. And I'm saying that because I should be able to let go right here and nothing moves. Right? So it's forming to the fly, which is what you want it to do. I think some people take this a little too loosely, and then it'll all unwind. But if I just pull down right there, I mean, all my chenille is staying in place. And this is, this is not special chenille that does that. Most chenille will if you do that. So there's a little tip. All right, so as we work forward, what we're going to do is we're going to start to work right into this hackle. Now what we want to do, or what I like to do rather, is keep this hackle so that it's flat across the top of the hook. I'm going to try to turn this to the side so you can see. But it's basically flat across the top of the hook. So when I come up with my final turn, I'm actually trapping some of that stem. Okay, and now I can bring this over and around. You can tie this in on the underside, you can tie it in on the top side. If you want your hackle to kind of stay in place, tying in your chenille in on the bottom side seems to work out a little bit better. So I've done 3 cross wraps. Right, now I can just place one in front of there, and I'm going to go ahead and get my thread back up front and away from all that. Turn it over and just trim this guy out. Now you've got that all tied in. Okay, so now we have our hackle perpendicular to the fly, which is exactly what we want, although I don't think I have my jaws quite tight enough, so I'm going to reset that. So when you're tying these in, what you want to do is, as you come around your first time, go ahead and make a second pass, kind of like you would with the dry fly, right up front. So you've got 2 turns up front, and this, you see how much fuller this makes the front. Now, angle it back at about a 45-degree angle, trying to keep your shiny side forward. And as you get better at this, you can, if you want to, you can make them not swoop to the back. You can make them stand straight up, you know, like this. It's really up to you. It has to do with how you position your hand, right? And so as I position my hand more in a direction that will keep that hackle up, you can see it does that. Is if I take my hand and start to angle it more towards the back, it starts to move the hackle to the back and let it flow. So you just want to keep that in mind. That's going to make a huge difference on how that woolly bugger travels, or looks as it's traveling, I should say. Neither way is wrong. I don't know how to convey that other than that. Personally, I kind of like to have it angled towards the back. It gives it that kind of profile that we typically like to see in a woolly bugger. So as we get our hackle towards the back and we're encroaching on the back, we got to get to the back and then just past that chenille. And this is also where I'll see people, like, they'll tighten too tight and their tail will turn all the way to the side or something like that. That has to do with your tie-in point and how well you tied your tail in, as well as how you're angling your material. Now, on a big webby fiber, like that other hackle that I showed you, stopping right here and not going a full extra turn like we did up front here can probably make no difference. Matter of fact, it may actually just add some extra beef back here that you don't want. So on a dry fly hackle woolly bugger like this is, I like to come around twice to make sure I've got full circumference. And then I'm going to bring my wire up off the tire side, and you see I've got them both directly up top. They're both wrapping in the same direction. And I'm going to leave my hackle sitting up top. You can already see that I've let it go. I like to put 2 turns of wire in the back here, even if my second wrap of wire goes over the first wrap of wire towards the back. As long as that doesn't mess with your tail too much, it's not a big deal. And now at this point, I'm going to counter rib or counterclockwise take my hackle coming forward. And this is a good example. You can see I can go slow and you can see all those barbs moving out of the way. And all I'm objectively trying to do is make sure that each wrap is trapping a stem. You can see it by the black marks. These don't have to be perfect wraps. Now, some people like to go fast. That's slow so you can see it, but you could absolutely just do it like this. Or you can go slow and wiggle it around to make sure that absolutely no barbs are trapped. Totally up to you. You need to do what's comfortable for you here. Okay, so when we get it to the front, I'm going to tie this wire off on top. Trying not to capture those. Oh no. If you capture a few barbs, it's not the end of the world. You can trim them out. Try to capture as few as little, or as few as possible. As few as little. That's good English, huh? And then to take this out, you'll see a lot of people use scissors. Let me show you a different way. Just pinch this here in your fingers. I've got it between my index and my thumb finger. I'm going to take my middle finger. I'm just going to lift up, pull it tight. I'm going to use this to kind of swoop like this forward. It's just going to pull it off. Everything will stay in place as long as you've got that nice and tight. I do have that one barb there that we're going to get rid of. Don't try to save that little barb if you got one of those. Just get rid of that little guy. It'll cause you problems later, and you'll add a bunch of thread wraps that you don't need to add. And so basically that's the end of how to tie a woolly bugger, regardless whether you have dry fly hackle like we've used here, or if you have a saddle hackle. Now I did say I was going to show you how to collar the fly. And so if you got a material kit, you got some of these long webby spay type fibers. You can use whatever you like. You could even put a little piece of partridge up front if you wanted to, and just get a little partridge up front to kind of maybe help identify some spots on the head or something. People do all kinds of fun and creative stuff here on a woolly bugger. And quite frankly, none of it's wrong. I've yet to see a woolly bugger that really doesn't catch fish to one degree or another in certain parts of the country or whatever. And so I'm just going to strip this down. We're going to tie this in soft tackle style. And this will kind of give you a flavor. I showed you some of the shorter versions. So this is kind of a short version with a little short collar on it. This one's got a little bit bigger collar on it. You can use whatever type webby long fibers that you like to do this. We're just going to tie this in soft tackle style, meaning I've already separated the hook. We've kind of covered that already in this session. Doing the soft tackles. So if you need help with that, go back and check out weeks 2 and 3. And we're just going to fold that to the back and tie that in. And we'll trim out just the tips. And at this point, you can actually start to build your head a little bit, as long as you don't got too much in the way. You can build your head a little bit, or you can just leave your thread right at the back and do what many people call walk the dog. So as we fold this over and we're bringing our hackle around, don't forget you can put your finger on the back side, let the stem rotate, capture it, bring it forward. As you do that, your thread is already moving forward because you're forcing it forward, and it's going to be essentially like right where it needs to be when you get there. So once you have the amount of turns over that you want, and again, this is an option. Most people are just going to leave it with the head without this collar, so don't do the collar if you don't want it. But we're going to go ahead and do it on this one just to show some other stuff. And you'll see how very similar this is to the fly that we tied last week. And fold that to the back. And we're building our little head. Before I finish the fly, so that's a woolly bugger with a big old collar. You'll actually see how it's very similar to the Carry Special. And people do this. They do. So don't be afraid to get creative. Okay, so I'm going to get my thread to kind of the front and trap some of those hackle fibers and work back and forth. If you're not adding the collar, you should be doing this part already, or be catching up right here. And then you can just color your thread, and we'll go ahead and bring the colored thread towards the back to help let it soak into the other white thread. The more you tie, the more you're going to have different colored threads. Again, we're just kind of using these, kind of going back to week 1. We've used so many different, we did so many different patterns that kind of require different color threads. That was kind of a material kit decision to use just white thread and let us color it. So that's why we did that. And now you've got your little woolly bugger with a collar on it. And that's a pretty big spay collar, but you get the idea. You can do these as you like. And again, there's not a lot of wrong here. So we're gonna go ahead and whip finish this guy coming forward. junk out of there. Pull it tight. And trim it off, and now you can add some super glue or UV resin. Okay, very cool. So on the next one, we're gonna add a wing, a marabou wing. We're actually gonna make this a two-tone bugger. We're gonna change the hackle that we use over to a saddle hackle. And you'll see how that comes out and how you can do a different type of bugger using some of these other techniques. So hang tight, and I'll see you on the second part of this video. Okay, so as you can see, I've already done the first few steps, and we've already explained those pretty well on the first part of this video. So what we're going to do now is actually make a two-tone bugger, and what we're going to use is this uni stretch in orange. Now you can make these in any colors you like, and a lot of the techniques we're going to cover here are going to help give you a foundation into leading to bigger streamer patterns, because they just incorporate some of these things. And so what we want here is we want a good bit. And when I say a good bit, I've got probably close to 18 inches of this uni stretch out. You want to make sure your thread's up front. And you know, if you're not ready, go ahead and pause the video here, and come back when you're caught up, so that way you can follow along and I can tie with you and not for you. So we're just going to fold this over in half. You can see I've got roughly probably 8 to 9 inches on each side, and we're going to do that several times. And so there's twice, and we're going to just try to get that loop to drop at about the same distance. It doesn't have to be perfect. I'm going to do it one more time. So that everything is relatively lined up. Okay. Next, what we want to do, I tie counterclockwise so I can slide this up underneath. If you tie clockwise, you're going to slide it from the front side up and over like that. But we're going to slide this up underneath and then bring it back and around underneath. And what this allows you to do, especially when you start getting into bigger stuff, we didn't even have to put a thread wrap in, as you noticed. And so you want to make sure you start to utilize that. What we are going to do is use the thread we already have in place, and we're going to start to draw this relatively flat. Oh, I hung up on my hook. I don't usually turn this sideways. And then once you have it to the length that you want, just place 2 or 3 tight turns over, and that's not going to move at all. Okay, so now what we need to do is we're going to work this to the back underneath. And when you do this, you want to make sure that when you bring this back forward, you've got enough to cover the length of the shank. That's extremely important here. You don't want to fall short. Okay, and now we can just kind of pick up where the other bugger left off. So I've already got my chenille prepped. I'm gonna come back forward because I like it this way a little bit better. Make sure that my chenille is working back into my marabou again, just ever so slightly. I'm gonna let that roll down underneath. I like to tie all of that material as much as possible underneath. And the reason for that is because when your material's tied in underneath, you're starting from underneath. And when you start from underneath, you don't have to, well, let me rephrase that. When you're starting everything underneath, all this, your hook and everything else is going to cover up that last little bit of, ugliness, as opposed to having it on the sides. And so what we're going to do this time is I'm going to leave this just like this and not add that front hackle. Now that front hackle I'm going to use is the webbier stuff, which is what most people are used to seeing on a woolly bugger. We're not going to add the collar or anything. You can absolutely do that if you want. You could add flash to the tail. You could add, you can do all the stuff that we've already done in all the previous weeks. You can start to add that to this here. So I'm just going to go ahead and start to wrap this forward, get my 1.5, 2 turns around. Make sure it's nice and tight to the back. Pull down tight on that chenille. Make sure it's not twisting on me. Everything we've already covered in the last specifically 2 weeks. Hone in on all that right here. You can make a really cool woolly bugger. And again, you can do this in the colors that you want. I've seen people add these streaks across the side. You can do that also with flash. That's done just a little bit differently. We covered that last week on the Carry Special and how you would tie that in. So if you're wanting some further demonstration on that, go back to week 5, where we tied it in the flash and then ran it back and all that stuff. So, or the tail flash that we did. I forgot where we did that one on. Anyway, so we're gonna work forward now. We're gonna tie a marabou wing in up front, and so when we do this, we want to make sure we have a lot of room up front, because that marabou is gonna stick out front. So we need to have at least 2 bodkin widths. I'm gonna go ahead and take that last turn back off. Well, maybe not. Maybe I'm just gonna pack it in a little bit tighter so that I've got enough room. I'm gonna tie this in and off on the top side, because any fugliness that you have is going to be trapped there on the top side. Excuse me. Not this cold or whatever it is. And so you should have a fly that looks about like this. Now on the 2-tone bugger, what we need to do is go ahead, and it helps greatly if you can invert the fly. I'm going to try to do this on the side so you can see. But you can start to take all these fibers and start to kind of draw them out and play with them a little bit until you have this nice, basically flat piece of color, if for lack of a better term, up underneath. And that's why you can see why we've doubled it over so much. So you can actually kind of split that amongst the eye if you like, just like so. You can tie it in by pinching the eye like so. You can, if you really want to, if you can do it on the side or up underneath, you can slide it up underneath your thread and do that like so. Now when you do this, you'll see how it starts to shrink down. And it's all this is totally up to you on how you want this to look. So if you loosen up on this a little bit and place a wrap over, it's going to have a little bit more girth to it underneath. And when you do that, you want to make sure that you place a loose thread wrap before you tighten down. And we're going to fold this over to the back. Try to show you. We're going to fold this over to the back, but we want to do it on the bottom side. And the reason we want to do that on the bottom side, sorry, I'm not trying to have my thumb in the way. The reason we want to do that on the bottom side is because that marabou is going to come in right over the top of that. And we're going to have extra room up top to tie in. Okay? Plus we still have to add our hackle and everything else. So we're going to go ahead and trim that out. Oh. And we can just start to tie this down. You want to tie this down or trim more off as much as possible right now. And get my little pinch scissors in there. Little pinch scissors work great for this. Oops. Snapped the thread on accident. No big deal. There we go. So we've got our 2-tone in. Okay, so we're going to move over to the webbier hackle here. And this is probably what most of you are used to seeing when it comes to a woolly bugger. And again, you can tie it in this end the way we did on the first one, where you tie this in first. But you can also tie this in the exact same way, butting up to the chenille, just like this. And a lot of this actually really just has to do with how comfortable you are with working these materials in conjunction with one another. So I'm going to fold this to the front. Just place a few thread wraps in. I try to get that stem off to the side so I can get my scissors in there easily. And just tie everything down. And if you have a little gap there between your hackle and your chenille, don't be afraid to do this. Just take your hackle, you can lay it directly across the back, just like so, and just start to work your thread back into the body ever so slightly until you have it where you need it. Okay, a little extra room up front's not going to hurt on here when we add the marabou wing. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and stand that straight up just like we did the last time. We're going to put 2 turns in front, try to get that thread out of the way. Now with these webbier fibers, you want to start to tease them open as you go. Make sure they're sitting right or where you like them. And we're just going to do this all the way back, and you can see the big difference between how the different fibers look on a woolly bugger. Now you can still see everything underneath, but the more you can tease this open now, the easier it will be to rib the fly, and the more natural it will look in the water. Because once we add the wire, you're going to really trap these down, and that's kind of it. Like, it's going to want to stay in place. So with the dry fly hackle, we had 2 turns around the back. I'm not doing that. I'm just going to bring the webbier fiber up, just right on top. Even though it's a little bit short on the back side, it's not going to really matter at all. I'm placing 2 wraps in. And the more confident you get at this, keep some tension on your wire, you can just take that and just snap it off. So you don't even actually have to rib the whole thing going forward, like we were talking about. So that's something that can take a little bit of practice, but I wanted to show you that it is possible. So now we're gonna, as we start to work it through, on these webbier fibers, now you may want to start to wiggle it through to make sure you're capturing stem. You don't have to have an obscene amount of wraps. The only thing that really matters is that you're wrapping over each cross section. That's what really matters here. This is not a dry fly bug where, you know, potentially, which is horribly debatable, fish could see the amount of ribs or something like that. I mean, I have seen a few people say that, oh no, you gotta have the right amount of ribs. Well, but that's not gonna matter much on this here. And so as you work everything forward and just kind of wiggling it through, we're going to bring this up to the front and stopping and tying it off on top again. And I trapped a few fibers, really not uncommon. You can try to fold them to the back, or you can just cut them out. Okay, let's go ahead and cut these ones out. Don't have to over groom here, just a couple that don't look quite right. You can go ahead and trim out. You got this one that's sticking way out front and not angled the right direction. So don't be afraid to get rid of those. Kind of like so. Okay. Now we can just take our thread and start to wrap back. Grab everything, draw it to the back, and wrap over. And you can see how the fibers naturally want to splay towards the back. So this is why I was saying that these fibers are going to start to collect around the shank and do something like this, right? And so they will also pop open in the water when the fly is a little bit stagnant. So if it doesn't have a lot of movement, these do tend to open back up a little bit more. So there's no real secret sauce to tying one of these other than finding out what works best for you in your local waters for whatever it is you're fishing for. All these techniques will work, crossways and combinations and all that stuff. That it'll all work, just depending on what it is that what you're trying to do. Okay, so now we're going to add a marabou wing. So I'm just going to get another piece of marabou. Let me get one here, holding it up in front of everybody. So I've just got another piece of marabou. And we're going to do the same thing. We're going to use the tips. You don't have to use the tip. I think it looks a little bit better, but now we can start to fold this back. And the whole idea here is that we take a wing right over the top and into the tail section just a little bit. I'm going to separate this so I get what I want here. And personally, I think it's better that you use the tips just because they're not quite as full typically. So when you lay it across the top like this, you want to try to get that flat, as you see right there. Sorry, I can't zoom out very well right here, but I'm going to zoom out in just a second. So you can actually just tie it in like this, just like you did the tail, and you can see it starting to fold over. And this is going to all encompass once it gets wet and down and around like so. So we'll go ahead and just do that right here. I guess I could trim out the tip if I needed to. We'll just go ahead and do it. You guys probably don't want to deal with that. Just strip the fibers back just a little bit. So we got some bare stem. Just strip them back so we have a little bit of bare stem. Again, wet the fibers so they come over the top, and you can line them out so they come about halfway into the tail. And pinch wrapping works best here to get those in and where they need to be. Now after 2 loose turns, you'll have a little bit of freedom to start to adjust this. I played with that too much. So you have something just about like so. If you got this guy coming forward, you can trim it out, rip it out, tie it in, whatever you want to do with it. We are going to fold this back over to help build the head. And now I will trim this out. Just grab the stem, run your scissors down the stem, get close. And essentially, if you've made it this far, essentially what you've done, minus just a few materials, is you've built the back end of a sex dungeon from Kelly Gallup. Although he doesn't add all the extra color underneath, although he should. I'm not going to tell him that, but you might as well. You're tying the fly and you'd add a little belly color there. Maybe you want your belly color to be lighter, darker, more fluorescent, flamboyant, whatever. So we're just going to color our thread and start to just wrap this forward, creating the head. Now that's an articulated pattern, and so you want to make sure you don't have to be quite as diligent not to get too close to the eye on that, because you're going to run wire or mono or something through that if you're going to make it articulated. However, it's always good to try and practice a little more tidy techniques as you're tying, just so that you get used to duplicating them and building that muscle memory, so that you can tie better flies. I mean, that's the whole goal. So also, I didn't mention, but I will real quick, you don't have to use chenille for your body material. I'm not going to go ahead and make sure every single little white piece is covered, but you don't have to, you could use ice dub or whatever you like for the body instead of chenille. So that's an option. If you really wanted to, you could run a little bit of peacock herl. You tie this wing in and run a little peacock herl off the back. Pardon me. Something like that if you wanted to. I just had that thread shred on me. Well, there we go. So now you can add a marabou wing to your woolly bugger. And it's really not too difficult. You got the belly color. You could run flash down the side. Just go back to week 5 if you want to learn how to do that. Just go back to week 5 and you'll see how you do that. And wow, we're done. 6 weeks. Very cool. We got so coming up next real quick, we've got streamers coming up. We're going to do some like bait fish stuff. It's going to be kind of a very broad overview. We're going to do some salt. We're going to do some fresh. We're going to do some patterns that cross over. And so stay tuned for that. Hopefully I can have some details coming out here in the next month or so. And other than that, guys, I really hope you enjoyed this session. Really appreciate everyone that followed along. I don't like that head, so we'll just finish this head while I'm talking to you. But I really hope everybody enjoyed it. I hope you learned a lot and gained some confidence, because that's really what these long form videos are all about, is to help expedite your fly tying journey. I do that by going and not just showing you what I do, but I go and find little tips and tricks that other people do, and start to show them to you, and where people tie them in, and how to combine them together. So if you like this style of format, please leave a comment below. Always appreciate that. And other than that, join us over on Facebook, Fly Tying for Beginners. You can find me there. And I'll end with come check us out over at Fly Vault. It's a paid membership thing that we're doing. But we're keeping it fairly cheap. We're starting to add a lot of stuff, but we've developed a way for people just like yourself to start to save their patterns digitally, so that they can go back and find them, as well as other people look at them. So plus the search function, which is what the Vault is really all about, is the search function. Is that you can actually go through and type in materials and any flies that you may that you have any questions with as far as materials are concerned. You can just type the materials into the search bar, and then all of those flies will pop up for you, and you can start to see how other people use similar materials and so on. So that's the whole purpose of the Vault. Plus, we're working on getting some other cool tech in there. I can't divulge any of that quite yet, but get in while the getting's good, and why we can still keep it cheap. We're going to keep this as cheap as possible for as long as possible, and So, but if you like what we're doing and you want to support us a little bit more, that's a great way to do it. So, other than that, everybody, happy tying. Take care. Check out I got more videos on the way that are not this long, and we will see you next session. Take care, everybody.